Okay. Is it recording?
Yes, it is.
Excellent. Here we are on The Blind Man in Black, and I'm very excited. We have a very special guest, juggler, clown, comedian, author, educator, activist, and I'm sure we're going to learn a lot more. Internationally loved and locally tolerated, Izzi Tooinsky. Welcome.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you.
Yeah, it's an honor to have you. So, why are you locally tolerated? What did you do in Nevada County?
Oh, it depends on who you ask. So if you ask the wrong people, I am tolerated. But basically, what can I say? I'm a fool. So
Mhm.
sometimes foolish things come out of my mouth, ridiculous things, actions I wish I could pull back, but I can't. And I've been here off and on, mainly on for close to 40 years. So I've done some really dumb things. And to those people, I'm tolerated. To others, I'm loved. What can I do?
Well, I appreciate your honesty and your vulnerability. That's very much respected. So, how are you holding up in this pandemic?
I'm thriving. I'm thriving. You
Really?
know, yeah, I'm thriving. Um, I'm not expecting it to be like it was before the pandemic. Before the pandemic, I was working all the time. I'd never had a better year,
Hmm.
actually. Before March 2020, uh, it was going fantastic. But, I'm a fool. It's really the way that I approach the world. And fools understand that everything changes. So when they change, we have to change with them. And so I have, and I'm doing great. Uh, Partly, um, well, I'm making an income by being a substitute teacher
Mm.
and just loving it. Um, I've been with the kids a lot, and mainly in high school.
Okay.
Mainly at the different high schools in Nevada County, and I am just loving it. Loving being with those high school kids.
Now, is it remote learning or a hybrid?
It's been I've rode the changes. So at first, starting in August or September 1st, actually, it was all online. And then they slowly let the kids back in, and then they took them back out again. So I've been riding that. I've been riding those changes, and each of the changes has been, in its own way, fantastic. Like when it was only online, it was very interesting, Brian, because I would
Mm.
have oh gosh, it was gym class. I was actually a sub, a long-term sub for a gym teacher, and I had the same kids for, well, I must, for a couple of months. So it was interesting because sometimes I check all the kids in, I tell them what they need to do, then they would go, except for one or two, and they often would hang around. They had nothing else to do. And so I would talk to them, that one or two kids, boy or girl, find out a little about them, what's going on with them. And they share with me, I share with them, but more than anything, just a humane and extended contact that I actually, that doesn't really happen in physical school, because I'm a teacher and they're a student and the bell rings and everybody goes their way. But online in this crazy format, Zoom format, most of them leave, but one or two stay, and we can have a long conversation about whatever might be happening in their lives, even in my life a little. They're very interested to know, what am I doing? They're some of them are fascinated, and I really share with them, without be without being too vulnerable or revealing. I let them know I'm working outside my house. I'm making brick pathways. I'm building a shed, and they ask me about it, and and that has been very sweet.
Now, how are they holding up during all of this? Have they disclose like how they're feeling about
Yeah,
the,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Some are devastated, you know, like just to put ourselves in their position. They're sophomores, juniors, freshmen, seniors in high school. They want to have fun. They want to be with their buddies. They want to experiment and explore and make mistakes. And there's very little that they can do. You know, their
yeah,
lives are online. You know, the mainly. I mean, I think we're going to have a period actually of detoxing. I don't know what it's going to look like, but we're going to have a generation now that has spent more time online than in real life. And they love it. I mean, in a certain way, they love their games. The games are made by, very clever people that make them want to play more and more and more. And there they are with no one to tell them to get off, because get off for what?
right.
They can't go for a walk with their friends. Or so it's going to be I hope that we thoughtfully and caringly understand that what these kids have gone through is going to change them forever.
Yeah,
you
all
know
of
and
us.
that yeah, all of us. Yeah, I mean, that's just the high school kids. I'm also working now that long-term job is over. I'm working with kids of all ages and beginning to go into the schools. And some of these some of these things, like developmentally, are really going to be challenging for the kids. Like, in for young kids, it's really important to learn how to read facial expressions. If someone's
Hmm.
saying something but they're smiling or smirking or frowning, or they're staring at you, or they've got kind eyes while they say something. Well, eyes they can still see, but the rest of the face is hidden. So these kids are losing a language, a visual language, a body, the ability to read the body language. They've missed that in this year.
Yeah.
And I, it looks dangerous to me, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a very precarious time. I apologize. I got to put on my sunglasses because of the light, but
No problem, no problem at all.
thank you. So let's talk about where everything began, the formative years.
Yeah. Well, I'm a storyteller, and it really helps me to look at everything in terms of a story. It's like history, like we're never just right here. We're a product of history, right? So
Mhm.
my own story, just like your story, it's a story. So to me, I break it up into three major chapters. I call it to myself, because anybody who asks it like you are, I say, first there was the garden, then the exile, then the clown show. So that's my life: the garden, the exile, the clown show.
Well, let's start
And
with the garden.
sure, sure. Well, the garden is, my family were all immigrants, and they had lived challenging lives. And we came and we were regular American people and American kids. And I felt like I was in the garden. No one told me. I knew, because I had a religious education. I knew what the Garden of Eden was, and I knew I was living it. I
Hmm.
knew my parents were my dad was the most handsome and courageous and smartest man in the world to me. My mom was the prettiest and the most social. I rarely said these words to myself, but I knew it as a child. My family was the happiest family. My religion, my faith, was the true faith. My new country, it was the best country in all the world. Um,
Now, your parents were first generation?
yes.
Hmm.
Yeah. So that's the way it was. I was living in the Garden of Eden everywhere I looked, to my extended family and my home. And It was perfect. But
Now, where
then
did you grow up?
I grew up mainly in LA.
Okay.
Yeah. I was born in or I came first living in Inglewood, California, and
Okay.
then in West LA, Culver City it was called.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I used to live very close to there. I lived Pico and Robertson.
I know that very well. My mom still lives right real close to there.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
near yeah. So yeah, so that was the garden to me. And even living in Los Angeles, first California, I was born in 56. So, I was just riding on the Beach Boys songs,
Right.
there was no place cooler than California. So anyways, that was my garden.
Hmm.
And then exile, everyone has their exile. Really
Hmm.
my the format for my life, the garden, the exile, the clown show, I really think that that's the way it is for everyone's life. But that's the way I express it for my life. And the exile was that my father had gone through hell and war, and like many fathers and mothers, but I'm mainly associated with fathers, there's it catches up with them, you know. So at about 40, exactly at 40, actually, my father's body began to deteriorate and his mind began to deteriorate. And my garden I was exiled from the
Mm.
garden. He was, God bless him, he was doing the best he could. And I really just, I don't want to go into too much about what happened, but he broke down and our lives became, terrible. And in that terrible is the word terror.
Mm.
So instead of living in the garden, we lived in terror. And the terror, was like it was the other face of God, the other face of my God was my dad. And the other
Mm.
face was devastating. So, and it did certain things to me, like I basically only knew how to be, I only was happy. And what happened when I began to be terrified, I mean, literally terrified, is I began to understand that my body had a life of its own, irrespective of my mind. So I was about 8 years old, I guess, when my body would go into uncontrollable spasms of fear.
Mm.
But my mind was, I don't want to say free. My mind wasn't trapped in that. It was like my mind could watch my body and say, wow, there's my body going. I didn't have any vocabulary for it. It was just an experience that I could literally watch my body do things that I had no control over, out of, as a result of the terror that we were living with.
Now, when you say, were you having panic attacks essentially?
Well, they weren't. It's funny when I hear the phrase panic attack, because these weren't attacks.
Mm.
I was attacked. I was living through trauma,
I see.
you know. So in the midst of the trauma, it's kind of like if someone's at war. It's
Mm.
not a panic attack when they can't control their bodies,
Mm.
they're experiencing trauma. So that was my experience. I was experiencing trauma, and I was aware of it happening. And then I began to, as the years went by, and after many years, my dad got help, and he really straightened up his life, and even became a therapist, actually,
Mm.
really, to his great credit. But a lot of damage had been done to me and my siblings.
Mm-hmm.
And you can forgive, but then you have to deal with the trauma that's there. So that's why I call it the exile. I could no longer be that happy-go-lucky, fun child.
Mm-hmm.
I knew, I don't know if this happens to other people because I really haven't asked, or revealed it very much, but I knew there was a darkness in me from that, from 8, 9 years old. I knew there was a darkness that no one could see. And it was like a part of me, you know, in Jungian psychology, they would call it a shadow, right? Like it's there, it's living. And I knew that sooner or later it was going to, well, I could feel it clouding me, clouding my happiness, clouding my um, observation, understanding, relations with others. And then something happened. I knew it was like there was going to be a storm, but I didn't know what or how. And then it happened. And what happened was I developed a kind of PTSD. It's obsessive compulsive disorder. And I had to be by myself. Like I could not, and it began to happen at first, maybe just once or twice a day. And then it began to be like it was part of who I was.
Mm.
And like about every 2 hours, I'd have to get all by myself. And if I didn't do that, I had all the classic um, experiences of people who are having anxiety attacks.
Mm.
Like you feel like you're going to die. You feel, you can't eat, you can't pee, you can't talk to people. You feel like you're going to explode, basically. So I didn't know what to do about that. And I didn't even know how to talk about it. Um, and then so I was just living with it uh, in a kind of weird, um, it was like a drama. Like on the outside, I could still be that funny kid that I was when I was younger. But I knew that nobody was seeing the inside. And I didn't, like I said, I didn't know what to do with it. But right about 15, when it was really revving up, that's when I had this experience. I went to a Renaissance fair. And this was in the old days, well, it was the very first Renaissance fair in America, was this one in Agoura, California, Southern California.
Mm-hmm.
So I went there and I really loved to be at the Renaissance fair. And I was dressed up as a character and I was in a little mime troupe and we performed. But I left my little group and was on a hay bale. And there I watched a guy, he was ancient, which is like younger than I am now. And he came out onto a little stage and there was only about 6 people sitting on hay bales. And this guy gave gave his heart and soul to the 6 of us.
Mm.
And he juggled with a mop and a bucket and a rag. And we laughed, the 6 of us. And when it was over, everybody left except me. And I just looked at the guy and he looked at me and came over and stood by me. And he introduced himself, he called himself Came and Went. That was his name, Came and Went. And he asked me, I told him how much I liked what he was doing, and I asked him if he could teach me. And he said, sure. So he began to teach me right then, just behind a little teeny stage. And I was slow at everything. I was slow at speaking. I was slow. I still am kind of. I was slow at thinking. I was just kind of slow. I played and told jokes, was like a little imp. But as far as learning things, I was always slow. I kind of, when I was in school, I sort of felt like I was in this fraternity of fuck ups, where there was the kids that learned and the kids that didn't learn. And the kids that didn't learn, like me, they just kept on trying to stuff the stuff in, the information, and it didn't stick. And we knew it, those of us in the fraternity of fuck ups, that we weren't going to learn. There, I don't know why, we just felt like, I don't know, we had given up. And the school had really given up on us. But this guy, he started to teach me how to juggle, and I got it really fast. And I think he was the first person that I can ever remember that was impressed by something that I had done. And then he started to ask me questions, came and went. He asked me questions like, is there anything that you're really bad at? And I said, yeah, I'm really bad at speaking.
Mm-hmm.
I I can't think of words. It's kind of like I can joke around, but in a conversation, if people are looking at me, it's kind of like they're looking at empty space.
Hmm.
It's like I'm looking at empty space. I can't pull the words together. And he said, that's very interesting. So you learn to juggle very fast, and there's something seriously going on inside you that's different from other people. He said, these are classic um, these are classic points that fools have all throughout history. Fools have had these classic traits, is what I'm trying to say. These classic traits. And then he went to his camper and he pulled out a book. And the book was called A Fool's Bible. And he gave me the book.
Hmm.
He said, bring it back next year. You take it. And
Hmm.
so I couldn't believe it. He said, because you're a fool. And I at first I was offended. He said, no, I really think you're a fool.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, read this book. And it was an ancient book. It was written half in Yiddish
Mm.
and half in English. And it was such an old book. I don't know, Brian, if you've ever seen these books that are so old. In the old days, you used to have to cut the pages.
Mm-hmm.
Did you know that?
How old are we talking?
Oh, I was probably turn of the century, about 1900.
Okay. Okay.
Anyways, that's the way it was. Pages, if you bought a book, you'd have
Mm-hmm.
to cut the pages actually.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the way it was bound.
Mm-hmm.
So anyways, I read that book and I read it over and over and over, and it changed my life. Uh, it told me about fools. It was called a fool's Bible, Tales of Fate and Folly.
Mm-hmm.
And it said things like, well, because no one really talked to me very much or in very much depth, it told me about time, about balance, about hope, about wisdom and silliness.
Mm-hmm.
So I just read these stories over and over and over until like I identified. I knew, it's kind of like someone finding their true faith. Like a kid becoming you know a zealot in one way or another. I knew I was a fool. It was a kind of, it wasn't like a faith. It was like I had found my mother tongue.
Mm. Now,
You know?
what was this about between 13 and 15, somewhere in
So
there?
yeah,
Now,
no,
did you,
no, I was at the time 15. I was 15, Brian, when I got the book.
right, 15. Okay. Now, did you tell your parents that you were interested in this, and how did they react?
To tell you the truth, they weren't very interested.
Mm.
And it wasn't, like I said, God bless them. They had their own things happening. So
Mhm.
I don't think my childhood wasn't really like most other kids' childhood. It
Mhm.
wasn't like my parents were they're interested in what I was doing and uh, guiding me. It just wasn't like that. It was
Mm-hmm.
more like, I was kind of an orphan.
Mm-hmm.
They had their own, you know, big challenges, and so I was pretty much on my own.
So when after you read this book, what did you say? That's it. I have to do this, or did it develop over time?
No, it was obvious right away. It was
Mm-hmm.
obvious right away that, like I said, it's like this is my mother tongue. It's
Mm-hmm.
kind of like if you went through your whole life knowing that you had a language that no one else spoke, and then suddenly someone sang you a song in that language.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I get it. And so I knew right away, there was no doubt.
Mm-hmm.
And so I read the stories over and over and over. And then when the year passed, I went back to that Renaissance fair, but came and went, had come and gone, and I never saw him again.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but I had the book,
Right.
and I read it over and over again until a few years later. Well, let's see, probably 5 more years later, I was in a little circus in Baja, Mexico, and there was a big, it was a flood, well, a little flood in the desert, and the truck turned over, and most of the stuff got lost in the mud. So my book got lost in the mud. So
Oh no.
I never saw Fool's Bible again, except for what I could. Well, I never saw it physically again. I remember a lot of the stories, and now that I'm older, I hear the stories from different sources, or I
Mm-hmm.
remember them, or I tell them to my grandchildren.
I'm assuming it's out of print. That's not something that.
No, yeah, exactly. It's out of
Yeah.
print. I've, of course, looked it up on the internet, and there's nothing, there's no Fool's Bible there.
Oh no.
It's
So
okay. No, it's really okay. Like I said, it's the way it is with fools. Whatever happens, you just look and you see how to continue. I mean, there is tragedy and there's sadness, but that's what happened. And here I am, and the book is in me. You know.
now, did you join like a group, or did you just decide to start performing on your own? How did that work?
Well, after Kim and Went taught me, I just started practicing, and I carried uh, 3 tennis balls in a sock,
Mm-hmm.
and I tied the sock to my belt loop, and I
Mm-hmm.
carried it wherever I went. And when I'd be hanging out with my friends, and they were mainly musicians, when they would be playing, I would juggle.
Mm.
And then there would be others, times we'd be sitting around and people would be talking. I would be juggling.
Mm-hmm.
So I made other juggling materials, and I just I didn't even call it practice. I just called it playing,
Mm-hmm.
and then people liked it, so people wanted me to do it, and then it got to be where, I was so I was kind of uncomfortable with other people because I didn't talk very well, but juggling was kind of like just like it's what happens with fools.
Mm-hmm.
Fools find something that seems worthless,
Mm-hmm.
and make a treasure out of it. And I didn't do any of this consciously. It was the truth. It was a fact. So juggling became my foolish entry everywhere.
And I can imagine it had a therapeutic nature to it. It was relaxing and to some
It,
degree and
oh
gave
yeah,
you a sense of peace.
it sure did. It worked, physically, emotionally, psychologically, even spiritually. I began to understand my little piece of the universe through juggling.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, I mean, the simplest thing that I can say is that what is what's going on in juggling? It's
Hold on
just
one
two
second.
things.
One
It's
second.
holding,
One
guiding.
second.
Yeah,
The audio just
sure.
just distorted a little bit. Could you start over one more time?
Sure.
Yeah.
It's the most fundamental act of juggling is holding and letting go,
Mm,
holding and letting go. And it's as if, well, it's not as if, it's actually what was happening, that this unbelievable um, uh, thing of juggling, this action could not just teach me, but teaches anyone who devotes themselves to it. You cannot do it without it speaking to you. It's like a key, but it's ridiculous. And the ridiculous and wonderful thing about it is that no one believes you. You know, no one believes me that that's what happens, so nobody does it. Hardly
mm,
anybody does it. But I know that it's true, and every juggler I know pretty much knows that it's true. That if you do that over and over and over, it begins to teach you. It begins to teach you like that. The most important thing is all we're doing is holding and letting go. And then it gets more intricate. We're not just holding and letting go, but in the letting go, we're subtly directing. So
mm.
we're holding, and as we hold, we direct just a little, and then we let go. That's like the skill of life,
Mhm.
is that we don't just, well, we let go completely. We direct consciously, hopefully lovingly, or maybe sometimes out of absolute desperation. We let go in a certain way. So
Yeah.
juggling, go ahead.
No, no. I mean, it seems like it's a metaphor for our relationships as well, right?
Exactly. It's a template for everything. Really, there is nothing that doesn't fit into that template.
It's beautiful.
It's stunning. And and there is a story. The story was in the Fool's Bible. The story is, why would a fool have such a stunning tool? You would think that only smart people would have such a wonderful tool. Why would the fool, the most foolish person on the planet, have such an articulate tool?
Mhm.
And there's a little story. Can I tell you the story?
Of course.
Yeah. You're. Should I tell you the story? Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, I think we're having it's okay. The connection's a little unstable, but we're okay. So go ahead,
Okay.
please do. Of course, yes. Tell the story.
Well, let's see if I can remember. Well, it goes something like this: that the great god of India, or one of the great gods of India, by the name of Ganesha. Ganesha is the god, some particular god of children, of students, of gamblers, and of jugglers.
Hmm.
Why those groups together? I don't know. It's wiser than I would ever attempt to know, but that's what it is. And Ganesha decided that he wanted to come to Earth and give people something that could make them feel good, and that they could teach others that would make them feel good. So Ganesha came down to Earth, and many of us know that Ganesha is the elephant-headed god, but he disguised himself as an old man, and he set up a table by the edge of a town, by the edge of a town, and there was a road going to the town, and the first person to come down that was a general, with an army behind him with 444 soldiers. And the general was riding a big black horse, and all the soldiers had razor sharp teeth. And anyways, he stopped, and the general said, "What are you doing?" And Ganesha, who was disguised himself as just a little juggler, said, "This is juggling, and I'm selling it. Would you like to buy it? It'll make you feel good. It'll make everybody feel good that you teach." And the general asked, "How much does it cost?" And Ganesha said, "Everything you own." The general looked at his horse and his 444 soldiers, each one with razor sharp teeth and claws, and said, "Ah, it's not worth it." And he went on. And the next person to the road was a very rich man. He was riding a giant white elephant, and it had silver tusks with bells on it that jingled when he walked, and 44 camels behind him, each one with a bag of gold and a bag of silver. And he stopped in front of the juggler, who was Ganesha, and he said, "What are you doing?" Ganesha said, "This is called juggling, and it will make you feel good, and you can teach it to other people, and it'll make them feel great too." And and the rich man, he cracked his knuckles and said, "Wow, well, how much does it cost?" And Ganesha said, "Everything you own." And the rich man said, "That's absolutely ridiculous." And so he went on with his elephant with its silver tusks and its bells that jingled when he walked, and his 44 camels with bags of gold and silver each one. Well, the next person to come, like every story, it's always a third one. It's the fool. And the fool was just walking down the road, and all he owned was a stick. And on the end of the stick was his underwear, like whitey tighties. And in those underwear was an apple and a piece of cheese.
Mhm.
He was walking down, and there he saw Ganesha. And he said, "What are you doing?" And Ganesha said, "I'm juggling, and it can make you happy, but it'll cost everything you own." And the little fool, I hope I said that was a fool. The fool thought, "Everything I own? Well, all I own is this stick and these underwear and this piece of cheese and this apple. Of course I'll give it to you. And you'll give me this precious gift of juggling." And so Ganesha taught the fool how to juggle.
Mhm.
And that is how the fool, according to a fool's Bible, that's how the fool acquired this incredible um, tool for wisdom, understanding, and health.
Wow. It's beautiful.
I think so too. Yeah, and you won't find that story anywhere. I've never
Hmm.
found it,
Hmm.
only in the Fool's Bible.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So, uh, I mean, so when you started out and was it just, it sounds like it just consumed your entire being in life. So, where did you go from there? You said you went to Mexico, you're in Baja, and
Well,
then,
there
and
was a
where?
lot of time way before that. I had gone to Africa, and I lived in Africa. I went to well, like I said, I was a really really bad student,
Hmm.
and I don't know how I passed high school. I'm sure I couldn't have passed now. Maybe nobody was watching, or it's just one of the things about fools. We're able to slip in and out of places where we really shouldn't. And
Hmm.
I slipped out of high school somehow, got a little degree, and then um, I knew I was completely uneducated.
Hmm.
You know, I was literate. I could read, but I was mathematically illiterate. I
Hmm.
didn't know how to read a ruler.
Hmm.
I really didn't understand what one quarter meant,
Hmm.
and I didn't know how to ask the question. All I knew was that I couldn't do, if anything had anything to do with math, or I just couldn't do it. So I went to a couple of years of community college. And in community college, I just took those classes over and over and over for 2 years. I took elementary math and I took elementary English
Hmm.
until I knew what a noun was and a verb and an adverb. I knew what a sentence was and how to write a paragraph. And I learned basic pre-algebra.
Hmm.
And I felt like I was somewhat educated, and I actually got good grades for the first time in my life. I was actually getting A's and B's. And because my grades were good, and I had a financial need, I was able to get this grant for the school in San Diego. It's not there anymore. It was called uh, United States International University.
Hmm.
And as it turns out, it was the United States International University, and it was connected to this whole group of international universities all over the world.
Hmm.
And I was ready for adventure. By that time, I was 20, and it turned out that I could go to Nairobi, Kenya, and go to school there. And so I don't think I had ever heard of Kenya.
Hmm.
I never didn't know a single word of Swahili. I didn't know anybody on the continent, but I had juggling
Hmm.
and I knew how to write a sentence and I could do a little bit of math. So I got it was a little scholarship and I went to Kenya and I was there for a year. And it was there that I really began performing. I lived out, I only had to go to school once a week for various different reasons. So I lived in a village
Hmm.
and uh, nobody had ever seen juggling there. I mean, it was even rare in the States. This was
Mm.
back in 1970, like 77, 78. It was
Hmm.
rare. I I had never met a juggler till I met came and went. So,
Hmm.
anyways, there I was in Africa, and I traveled all over East Africa. It was Kenya and Tanzania and Zanzibar, and wherever I went, I juggled and just got huge crowds,
Hmm.
giant crowds. You know, for me at the time, a
Hmm.
hundred people that was a giant crowd, and I
Hmm.
developed a kind of show, a very simple show. You know, very. My Swahili was bad. My English wasn't even that great, but you know, with a little bit of English and a little bit of Swahili, I developed a street show, and I did it over and over and over and over. Um, and then when I came back to America, which was in about 78, I guess, uh, I had a show and I had a character and I had a way to present and I could deal with things like I could deal with a drunk who was in the audience. I could deal with an ambulance. You know, I could deal with a crowd.
Hmm.
So I came back to America and I started performing at Venice Beach.
Hmm.
And there was another place I was mainly on the West Coast, Venice Beach and Balboa Park, which is in San Diego.
Hmm.
And street performing was just at its infancy at that time. There was not many, but every city had a one or two guys like me that would show up at like the art museum in front of the art museum or you know at a boardwalk or something and the police were very aggressive towards us. They didn't know what to make of us.
Hmm.
They thought we were panhandlers. So in every town, every city across America, guys like me had challenges with the police and with the park authorities, but we all made our way through until street performing became part of American life. And now if you go to Pier 39, you know, or you go to Faneuil Hall, which is in Boston, or you go to Seaport Village in San Diego or Balboa Park, street performers in all those places, and not just some guy strumming a three-string guitar and begging. A great performer, a skillful performer with
Hmm.
hundreds of people watching, and that performer is making a very good living.
Hmm.
So that's what started to happen to me when I came home. I was part of that first wave of street performing in America.
And where did you travel to with that work?
Oh, all over the place.
Hmm.
I got a wonderful grant from the state of California. It was a touring grant,
Mm.
and the state I had to compete, and I won. And there was four people in the state that won. Me and there was another group here from Nevada County. So the
Mhm.
two of us from Nevada County won out of all the entire state. That's kind of representative of what was going on in Nevada County at that time.
Mhm.
I didn't tell you a whole bunch of how I moved up here. But anyways, Nevada County we had some incredible talent up here. And the other
Mm.
group, they were called Backwoods Jazz Quartet. Annie McCann, Paul Emery. Yeah,
Mm.
Annie McCann, Paul Emery, they were in it. So they won this grant and I won it as well. And what the grant was, uh, a California Touring Grant Award, the state would pay half of our fees for any nonprofit organization. So nonprofit meant like any fair,
Mm.
most festivals, schools, um, yeah, or hospitals, all kinds of places. So I traveled all over the state, with this thing. And then I won, part of winning that award was I got to perform at a showcase called the Western Fairs Association. And there was fairs all the way up and down the west coast of America, all the way up, and Canada, all the way up into Alaska. And that's when my career exploded. And I was at the Alaska State Fair performing. I was probably there, probably 5 different occasions, tours there. And then other fairs in Alaska and all throughout Canada, Winnipeg, Thunder Bay. I was getting shows, the Izzi Tooinsky's juggling shows all over the place, and having a really, really wonderful, I think very unique experience. Um, but there was a problem. Go
So,
ahead. Well, the problem was that I still had this issue. I could not shake this um, obsessive compulsive disorder, where even though all of this was happening and it was all uh, a wonderful life story and a wonderful experience, inside I still had this thing that I could not get rid of.
now, I can relate. I have obsessive compulsive disorder, and it manifests from everything from checking to germophobia to moral thought action fusion. Uh, all of it basically. It's all the obsessives and compulsives. But
Yeah.
my
And I
question to
think we
you is
need to
how
talk
does it?
about it, because I think the reason why I'm saying it, I'm glad you're talking about it too, Brian, but we don't talk about it. And many people live with this in isolation. So go ahead and talk.
No, I what I was going to ask was how did your obsessive compulsive disorder manifest?
It was the same thing that I had since I was, 15. And
Hmm.
that experience of every 2 hours or something, I had to be absolutely isolated.
Oh, okay.
It was like the only way to make my this is the way I articulate it to myself. The only way to make my nervous system cool enough so I could function in society.
So it wasn't the stereotypical hand washing and things like that. You weren't
No, no, it wasn't. I
okay.
No, I so envy people who had panic attacks, because mine wasn't just an attack. Mine was sewn into the fabric of who I am, my personality, not just my personality, but what I carry in the world like I said, every 2 hours. So yeah, so
Now, was it the the compulsion that you had to be alone for two? Was it specifically 2 hours, or you just need to be alone until you were able to calm down and or was it that you had to be alone for 2 hours? What was
no,
it?
it wasn't that I had to be alone for 2 hours. It was about every 2 hours or 3 hours, it would build up. So
I see.
even if I was alone for a minute,
Hmm.
but I had to be completely alone. Like no
Hmm.
one could be waiting for me. Like obsessive compulsive experiences. It has it writes its own story.
Hmm.
It has its own rules and laws. So yours is going to have a different rule than mine. And why
Hmm.
these happen? Well, there's probably some little tweak or twerk that happened that wrote that rule for me. But my rule was that about every 2 to 3 hours, I had to be absolutely alone without anybody, without any expectation,
Hmm.
anyone waiting for me. It wasn't like I could just, you know, wander off, and I could wander off, but if anybody was waiting for me, that messed it up for me. I had to have absolute autonomy.
Hmm. Now, what would happen if you didn't get that alone time?
I got sick,
Hmm.
so I became. I really haven't spoken to many people about this, but so I'm not sure how other people do it, but I imagine they did it like me. I became flawless wherever I went, I'd always look for where can I go. It was
Mm.
like the first thing, if I went to a party, or if I went to someone's house, or if I was walking with somebody, there
You're
was
looking
all,
for an exit.
yeah, I'm always looking for, I was,
Yeah.
that's the way it expressed itself.
Now, does it still manifest to this day, or?
Well, I really worked on it, and
Mhm.
I did everything. It was like a mortal, I don't know how to say it, maybe like not a mortal enemy, but I knew it was like my life lesson. Many of us, I've read stories where there's like one major life lesson that we need to learn, one major, there's all these challenges, but one major thing we've got to do, one major mountain we have to climb. And for me, this was it. And I tried everything. I tried acupuncture and pressure, and primal screaming, and hot cold tubs, and therapy, and I tried everything, but it seemed impervious. It seemed like it couldn't. I couldn't get through. Nothing could get through.
Mhm.
So I did other things. Like I meditated, and these things were really good, and
Mhm.
took really good care of myself, and that was really good. But as far as the essential problem, I couldn't get to it until I'm now 64, and 4 years ago, I felt like I have to I have to I want to turn over every stone, and because if I don't, I'm gonna have to live with the fact that I'm a broken person.
Mm.
And I didn't know how to do that.
Mhm.
I didn't know how to live with the fact that there's something in me that's broken that I can't fix. So that was a devastating feeling and realization. Um, yeah. So, anyways, I decided at the time, about 4 years ago, I went to Peru. I was beginning to hear about ayahuasca,
Oh, yeah.
and I thought, what the hell? I'll go to the end of the world. It's
Mhm.
a perfect story, you know. Like, you want the pot of gold, you have to go to the end of the world.
Mhm.
And so I uh, met some people, and they told me how to do it, where to go. And so I made my way to Peru and deep into the Amazon, um, and I met this shaman is not really the right word, because a shaman technically is some guy up in Greenland. That's where the word comes from. There are curanderos. They're ayahuasqueros. Really, they're people who know. They're masters of ayahuasca.
Mhm.
And so I did it. Was there for a month, and it was it it got in. It got in where, past where nothing else could get.
Hmm.
And
So, talk about that experience, like the first time that you did it.
sure. Well, I did it about probably did it about maybe 14 times in that month.
Mhm.
They don't do half measures.
Mhm.
It's like, do it, do it, do it, do it.
Mhm.
And so I did, and I lived uh, to get to where I live. I lived on a little hill, and to get to the little hut where I lived, I had to wade into a river.
Mhm.
And then when I got out of the river, I had to climb up this bank. And the way I would get up to my place is I'd climb up roots until I get to the place where I lived. So I was extremely isolated, but at night I would do the ayahuasca, and then I would usually stay in this little place they call it Maloka, where you do the ayahuasca. And what happened immediately, when I first started doing it, was like they say, like your eyes are peeled back and you see what you thought could never be. And that is that we live in a universe that's populated by, we're just one of the beings here in this universe. There are many other creatures in this universe. And what started to happen, and I'm going to tell my story, and I don't want anyone to think that this should happen to them or even it could happen to them. This is just my tale, and I'm saying it because to tell people that it is possible to heal.
Mhm.
And I think that when I die, that's going to be on my tombstone. Healing happens,
Mm.
right? So what happened to me was, um, these creatures came to me. First of all, these some creatures came to me, some beings, and they did a kind of pruning or something. They touched my brain. This was not a physical people, but they
Mhm.
touched my brain, and I could see it. I could see the electricity that they were working with, that it was coming from their fingers. It was blue electricity, and I knew something was beginning to change. So when I wasn't on ayahuasca, I could feel a change was happening.
What did the creatures look like?
Those ones, at that point, I couldn't really see the creatures. I couldn't see their bodies. I could just see their hands, and I could see the electricity coming out of their hands. And I couldn't even watch that for very long. That actually made me lose consciousness. It was
Mm.
too too extraordinary. But then after a while, I'll tell you, I think, ayahuasca to me it's like a language. It's not just a plant. There's actually two plants they put together to make the brew, but it's not just a plant. It's a wisdom. It's a language, and you go on a very, excuse me, a very strict diet, so that you can, so the language can actually vibrate through you. And so I really, purified myself with the diet and did the ayahuasca, and then that's where it became clearer and clearer with the different creatures. So at one point, a snake. Uh, do you remember, Brian? I don't know. You could see when you were a young person, couldn't you?
Yes.
Yeah. So you remember probably these old encyclopedias that would have
Mhm.
transparencies. You know how you could look and see the body, like here was a skeletal system, the
Mhm.
transparency.
Yeah.
Did that sound familiar to you?
Yeah, this the anatomy, yeah.
Yeah, the anatomy. Yeah,
Yeah.
right. So that's what happened to me. These creatures came to me. So like a snake came and it laid on me like a transparency until the division between me and the snake disappeared. And
Hmm.
I was identified as the snake. I was the snake. And I wasn't aware of a separation at that point between me and the snake. What the snake was doing, and this was confirmed to me by the shaman later, what was going on, the snake was making me go like this, like open my mouth real wide and
Mhm.
stick my tongue out as far as my tongue could go. And what the shaman told me later was that the presence of the snake, was helping me to clear out certain poisons that were inside of me.
Mm.
And then other creatures came, like a jaguar came one time, again, laid on top of me. No identification with myself as Izzy. It was, I was the jaguar. And the jaguar, me, was fierce. I could feel the deep resonance of the jaguar's purring. I could feel the fierceness of the jaguar's my presence. And again, I didn't need. It's a wonderful thing to be self-referential with this, but so I won't say the shaman said this was right or wrong because I knew it was for myself. What the jaguar was bringing out of me was fierceness,
Mm.
fierceness to face what I'm facing, fierceness to go through what I'm going through, whatever that happens to be. And so, and then, creature, there was about, a number of other creatures that did that in the series of ayahuasca ceremonies. And it really, it helped me. It helped to break the, traumatic block. But
Hmm.
I knew even after a month that I wasn't done. And anybody who I've heard stories of people, they do it once and that's it. I don't
Mm.
believe it. I've never seen that myself, and I know for myself that's not the way it was. So
Hmm.
I had to go back again a year later for another month or 3 weeks,
Did you have the same visions or were
and
they different?
it was like I had to go back, and some of it was similar. What was similar was living beings. Especially in Peru, is so dynamic. Like termites. There are these gigantic termite hills there. I felt like I was in a termite hill, but they were very benign. They didn't hurt me in the least, but just hundreds, thousands, millions of living beings, just like a cyclone of living beings all around me.
Hmm.
And again, and I had to go into, when I got back there, it was like I was starting all over. It was, I don't know why this happened, but it pulled me deeper into that isolation, and I had to work through that again. And this was a time when people say it just happened like that. Uh, I had I had an experience, and I knew I was, a certain degree healthier than I had been before I did that ceremony.
Hmm.
Um, a little, I was healthier. I was, yeah, a little bit of the dysfunction, not just a little bit, but like a chunk, like an iceberg, had broken off, and I knew I was freer. And I've gone back uh, 2 times since. So now I've gone 4 times, and each time it's it scares the shit out of me, and
I
it
I bet. I mean, it sounds like it could be terrifying.
it it it's absolutely terrifying, and but it's wondrous, and I don't mean just like visions because I all of that happens, but there's the experience of, here I am in a world that I don't get and I don't understand, and really it's faith, love, surrender, in that place that, you know that's the guide, is the inner guide, is faith, love, surrender. And I began to feel, for pretty much the first time in my life, the garden again.
Mm.
And I yeah, it's very personal. I don't really want to say anything more about that exactly. Uh, but yeah, I really began to feel the garden, and it was true, and it is true, and it's here, and I feel it, and I'm I'm a fool. I'm a fool who went to the end of the world to heal myself, and everyone laughed. I don't care. And I'm sure people listening to this,
Now, when
they
you say laughed, you mean laughed at the idea that you did it, or
both, that like drinking a brew uh, with these Indians in a hut in Peru, and I don't speak any Spanish, and it's crazy.
Hmm.
you know, but every story, that's why the fool has two tools mainly. One is storytelling, and the other is juggling. All throughout history, all throughout known history, and every story says the fool. No one believes that he can do it. He doesn't believe he can do it, but all he knows is he has to try. He he has to, and he goes to the end of the world, and there he finds at the end of the rainbow the pot of gold, and then he's able, and he doesn't stop there and relish in his pot of gold. Then he knows what he has to do is bring that gold back and spread it around. That's every story. It doesn't matter uh, what part of the world or when the story was told. That's a universal truth. So that's why I identify so strongly that, with the truth of being a fool.
Now, how did you develop your sense of comedy?
Well, it was always, I always, because there was this real darkness and I
Hmm.
couldn't express that darkness, I just expressed the opposite.
Hmm.
And that was much easier. And then I got good at expressing the opposite of darkness.
So, do you identify with the idea that tragedy loves comedy?
Yeah, I mean, basically, you gotta know that tragedy in order to be a good comic,
Hmm.
you know. And you know who really loves that is children.
Hmm.
Children just they feel the depth of the comedy and I think they feel that I don't know if they feel the depth of the tragedy, but they feel what it does is it makes you real. That's what they feel. Even though you're a clown and you're tripping over your feet and or you're a fool and you're doing these silly things, they feel the essence. That's it. They feel the essence of the 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 comedy and the tragedy that are working underneath the silly expression.
Hmm.
Well, I've seen plenty of clowns that are just they're mundane, they're plagiaristic, they're trying to be some other clown from TV or something. They're not funny or even interesting. But the
Hmm.
most interesting clowns, you just feel in your gut, and children get it too. Old people, everyone gets it. Even cross culture and cross language, everyone gets there's something essential to this, something essential that touches me about this clown.
Hmm. So, what were some of the journeys that you went on that were the most profound for you? You've been everywhere, right? So, what are some of the places that you've been that were life changing or brought enlightenment?
Well, I don't want to say broad enlightenment, but
Well, you also met some people along the way. I mean, you met the author to One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
yeah, yeah. But met him in a burrito joint, and he had seen me perform. Ken Kesey had seen me perform at the Oregon Country Fair, and then I met him in a burrito joint in San Jose, and we shared a burrito together.
Oh,
So
okay.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But I mean, I think I mean, I lived in Australia. One thing about beauty, beauty just takes your breath away. Real extraordinary beauty. So that's I had the opportunity to do a lot of traveling and to see extraordinary beauty that kind of gives you it feeds your own faith. It feeds your own love of life. And we need that love of life to carry on. I think that's something we can't tell people what to do. we can barely help people. All we can do is help them along in their journey, you know? And that's what happened to me when I went to these different places, like Fiji. I performed a little in Fiji and Australia, New Zealand, and many of these other Wales and Ireland, many wonderful places that just fed me along the way. And it's kind of like you're a train on that track, just but that train's got to be fed, and it's fed by often by beauty, So really more. I mean, I met a lot of wonderful people, but often it was the beauty of nature that helped to feed me the most.
Mm. Now, you along the way, you had a family, and how did that change your performing?
Oh gosh. Well, it didn't work very good, to tell you
Hmm.
the truth. I didn't know this at the time that, I was a traveling fool. I was a traveling performer, and I couldn't really hold. I tried to hold the family together,
Hmm.
but it didn't work. So that happened to me twice. I went quite a few years after the second one and after the first one and jumped into the second one. And this was in Australia, and I was traveling all over the country and New Zealand and back to America all the time and doing shows traveling and performing and having a family didn't work.
Mm.
So, yeah, that was a hard one. But you know, what was incredible about performing is, sometimes I'd be, well, I'll tell you this one time I told you I was in Alaska at the state fair many times and this other fair in Fairbanks. And I was there with a broken heart. My partner had left me, my wife had left me, and I had a broken heart.
Mm.
But I had to go out onto the stage and I had to perform, not just
Did you feel
perform.
like Pagliacci?
Yes, kind of like that. Kind of like that. In my own way.
Hmm.
So I had to go, but I think maybe a little different between me and Pagliacci is I didn't act sad. I acted,
Hmm.
and I beamed, and it was really such an interesting experience. In Alaska, I don't know. Part of it is they don't get a whole lot of performers, but they don't get a whole lot of jugglers or fools. But I had audiences of like Athabascan Indians, you
Hmm.
know, and lumberjacks in one crowd,
Hmm.
and I just opened and did the best best show I could. And I remember at one point after the show, this one guy came over and he, everyone's taller than me, so he looked down. He said, I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I just want to look into the eyes of a man who brought so many people joy."
Uh,
And I had a broken heart. I knew it. I knew it
hmm.
in the middle of the show. I knew my heart was broken.
Hmm.
But I think, like I said, something essential was happening, in between the comedy and the tragedy that made my show compelling, to the most common of folks. That's who I was performing for at state fairs and county fairs, people eating their corn dogs, and, they're going to go on the zipper after me. And um, it's my job and my intention to give them the best show I can, and while I have a broken heart. So that was one of my greatest teachings, that even though you have a broken heart, you can still give even more than you ever gave before.
Mm. That's beautiful. So, how did you end up writing the books that you wrote?
Oh, that was easy. Um, that was the easy part. One book, uh, let's see. Well, I have two. One is called Juggling Without Struggling, and the other is called The Turkey Prince. And The Turkey Prince is a story that I learned from A Fool's Bible.
Hmm.
And then it turns out, that other people, that is a story that I've heard in other places, and but never told like in The Fool's Bible. So I felt like if I had one story to tell, like after I'm gone, I'm here for a brief moment, and when I'm gone, this book will survive. And
Hmm.
that story is the story I want to leave for not just my grandchildren, but for your grandchildren.
Hmm.
It's I just have a moment here. What can I leave? I'm leaving that story. So
Hmm.
that's that book. And the other one is called Juggling Without Struggling.
Hmm.
And that was real simple. That was just, there was a little toy company actually, and they
Hmm.
wanted me to write the book, and then they went out of business and gave me, must have been 1,000 copies of this book that I still have. So I've just given them away, sold them for $1 here or there. But yeah, it's a sweet little book with some juggling tales and instructions of how to juggle. But I have done, other, there was like the heyday of audio storytelling,
Hmm.
where it was CDs, first tapes and CDs, and I made a bunch of those. But now, with the advent of screens, it's really hard to get kids to listen to a story.
Hmm.
It's got to have a pink elephant that's on a cloud, and that's what's happening to children's. That's what's happened to technology and the way the children receive stories these days is through those, through iPads and things and computers.
Yeah, and the next step is virtual reality and augmented reality.
Yes.
So I've seen a little bit of that, and it's interesting. It looks like it could be something. It's like any tool; it can be very creative or profoundly destructive as well. So,
Right. Right. Right.
but
And
that's the
and and I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no, no, no. Please go ahead.
Well, just like I was saying when we first began, is that um, a fool knows that everything is changing and uses every opportunity. And so now the opportunity for a storyteller is now I'm telling the best stories to my grandchildren.
Hmm.
And those stories it's I would it would they were like a bonfire for a little while, burning bright. But now I'm not just keeping the tradition alive to keep the tradition alive. I'm doing what's essentially necessary for me to do, which is to tell my children, my grandchildren stories. And by doing what's essentially necessary for me to do, I'm helping the planet by keeping these stories alive.
Yeah, I was thinking about that with that book that, is no longer in print. You're able to pass that on, that knowledge and wisdom, and that's important.
Yeah. And what I love, Brian, also is that with storytelling, you never say, I never say, this is knowledge and wisdom. In fact, there's a wonderful story, one of my favorite stories of all that I first read about in the Fool's Bible. And it's a dialogue between truth and parable. And can I tell you the story?
Of course.
It's
Yeah.
one of my favorite. I haven't told it for a long time, but it goes something like this. Naked truth was running through the streets, pounding on doors, yelling into windows. Listen to me. I know what's going on. But everyone closed their windows and slammed their doors. And Naked Truth
Hmm.
went up against a wall and slid down, wondering, what can I do? Then he heard clapping and laughing, and he looked around the corner, and who did he see but his brother? And his brother, his name was Parable. And Parable had a crowd around him. And Parable had a funny hat on with bells on the end. And Parable had bright clothing and children on his lap. And he was telling a story, but as Naked Truth listened to the story, he knew that Parable was saying exactly what he was trying to say. And after the people had given Parable money and left food for him and told him to come to their house later, Naked Truth said, I heard you. You're saying exactly the same thing. Why do they love you and run away from me? And Parable said, people don't like the naked truth. It's just the way it is and has always been. So all we have to do is dress ourselves in funny clothes and a funny hat and dress our whatever we want to say in a story. Then not only will they listen to you, but they'll give you money, they'll give you food, and they'll invite you to their house so you can be warm next to the fire with them. And so the next day, Naked Truth went, got himself a funny hat, got himself some cool, bright clothing, and he made a great show. And people are still listening to him.
That's beautiful, and it's so true. I think about all the I love comedy and the great comedians that I love. Like George
Yeah,
Carlin, Richard Pryor. They all use you know sometimes they use like dick jokes or whatever, but when they get past those jokes,
yeah,
they get to the
yeah.
heart of something very profound that
Oh,
it
yeah,
deals with social justice or whatever.
sure. Yeah. And they never call it wisdom, they never call it truth, because as soon as you do that, you start to put a label on it and you make it into a belief system. You just, I mean, those guys are fools. You just keep it
Mm.
light, you make it foolish, you do it while you're, spinning a ball on your finger, and it can be accepted or not, but at least you have the people are there and they're listening and they're enjoying. And if they want to take some of it home with them, great. If they don't, well, it's like the universe, like what can we take with us?
Now, here we are in a very precarious time. We have a pandemic, COVID-19, we have climate collapse, we have political collapse, and economic collapse all happening. How how are you feeling like you can what you do can change the narrative to kind of change the world and how we think?
Well, I have to start right here, me, and I'm aging. Oh, I mean, we're all aging. I'm 84, and I've developed this tremor. You know,
Mhm.
it's a, uh, it's like Parkinson's. You know, so here I am. What do I have to share with all of that? Even now that I'm got these tremors, and I go into high schools, and what I have to share is that I'm okay with myself in the midst of so many challenges. I'm okay with myself. And we don't know what this is going to go, what's going to happen, but but if we can share, not just share, if we can be an example to young people that no matter what befalls us, we can be okay with ourselves. To me, that's like the greatest lesson.
Absolutely, absolutely, that resiliency, and what I'm also hearing is adaptation. When you talk about the fool, you're talking about the fool's ability to adapt to any circumstance.
Yeah, yeah. In the Fool's Bible, it starts with just talking about time, and there's stories about time, and then of balance, and then how that comes down to our lives, physical, emotional, mental. And it talks in the Fool's Bible about why it's so essential in juggling, why we develop both sides. And this has to do with resilience. What happens if our right hand is broken? We have a left hand that we have developed all these years that can do all these subtle, not just tricks, but can help to keep us not just alive, but thriving just with one hand. Or what if
Mm.
both of my hands are infirmed, which has happened to me, or actually just one arm? I've had this repetitive strain injury, but I can't really use my arms very well. What can I do? Do I lay down and die? No, because in a fool's Bible, it teaches you to be resilient. I learned to juggle with my knees.
Mm.
So if I can toss one ball up, bam, 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 I try to hit it 20 times, knee, 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 knee. It keeps me on the top of my concentration, the top of my physical skill.
Mm-hmm.
Other people enjoy it, and um, and it's while a part of my body is either deteriorated or healing. You know what I mean? So there's
Mm.
resilience or endless opportunities. That I mean, that's a way of articulating what resilience is. Endless possibilities.
Right. Right. Now, has there been a moment, because I mean, like I mentioned, this podcast is the theme of it is loving beyond fears. Can you think of a moment in your life that really is an example of that loving beyond fear?
Oh yeah, yeah, quite a few times.
Mm-hmm.
And one time was with my grandma.
Mm-hmm.
My grandma was the illustration to me of unconditional love. And I didn't know how to articulate it or understand it, but I knew that there was nothing I could do that that I would lose my grandmother's love. So it didn't make fear go away necessarily, but what it did was gave me a North Star,
Mm-hmm.
you know, like no matter what's happening, my grandma loves me. And, and now, I feel that with my wife, Janice. I feel like no matter what, she loves me. And that's like a North Star. So I'm not sure if that fits completely into the paradigm that you're saying, but for me, it's really essential and astounding to have a North Star that cuts through the fear, the doubt, and I've also, you know, experienced it really through meditation, where, meditation is basically just a technology, not just, it's a very, very wonderful technology where you learn how to tune in to the core, your own personal North Star, irrespective of anyone else or anything else. It's who you are essentially, or I don't want to even reduce it to something. It's more like a core, and that core is um, I'm trying to think of the right word. It's health giving. It's guiding. It's nurturing. That's the word I'm searching for. See, remember in the beginning I said that I always had this problem when I was younger that I couldn't think of the right word.
Mm-hmm.
And then what I did is I learned that what I need to do is find the feeling. So now that's what I do. And it sounds like it's taking a long time. Oops. It says here my internet is unstable. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what I've learned to do with that problem that I have of not finding the right word is I just stop, even though the conversation has to stop, and I feel. And often that feeling will take me to the right word. And the right word here took me a moment, is nurturing. So, I through meditation and also through, to be honest, ayahuasca, you know, I've through those technologies, I've learned there is a way within myself to feel without a doubt that nurturing North Star that's beyond fear and doubt.
Mm. I have to ask now, is there a style of meditation that you do? Is it transcendental meditation, or is it something you developed on your own?
No, no, long time ago, I met a Tibetan teacher, and he was a practitioner of the certain form called Dzogchen, which is a Buddhist form. And I went to his retreat, and I was actually I was bored. He didn't speak very good English,
Mhm.
but he taught this thing. And just like I was saying happened to me in the ayahuasca session, where I was deeply touched. I was deeply touched by this teacher,
Mhm.
not just because his teaching, his words were so profound or something. I was literally like smacked in the head by something that he was emanating,
Mhm.
and I knew that I this was what I needed to practice, and it's really it's a wonderful meditation. I can tell you what it is right now if you'd
Oh,
like.
please do. Yeah.
All it is you don't think about anything. You just relax and you accept yourself and you feel. It's that simple. I mean, of course, there's volumes and volumes of books and there's lots of subtlety to it. But if any of us practice that, just that simple thing of being quiet, accepting, and being awake, quiet and awake, then that's it. That's that that's the Dzogchen method of discovering that nurturing North Star that cuts um, that allows us to see something that's beyond fear, not
Mm.
something, the reality that's beyond fear and beyond separation and beyond even doubt.
Now, how long have you been practicing that?
About 30 years.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. So it works.
It, it, it absolutely, I mean, I wouldn't blame anybody if they didn't do it.
Right.
I can only speak for myself.
Right.
It's like, but really in a certain way, it's a path for fools because think about nothing, do nothing, just sit there and accept. There's like nothing to hold on to. But
Right.
after a while, it becomes self-evident that what you're doing is you're bathing in the glow of your essential nature. We all are at all moments, but we don't give ourselves time to feel it. And that's what, the Dzogchen teaching just says, just do it. Just, dedicate yourself to, a certain amount of time every day. And then all throughout the day, just bathing in your essence by not doing anything and being awake at that moment.
Mm, that's amazing. I have to ask you because this is an exclusive. Um, so did you and Janice get married or
We married each other.
I'm sorry, the internet
So
just
we've both been married before, a couple of
right.
times. Okay. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. So we've both been married and we've done the ceremonies and we've signed the papers and had the party and um we didn't do that this time. This
Mhm.
time we just eyeball to eyeball, lip to lip, married each other. And
Congratulations.
yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Now,
Yeah.
did you do it
Yeah.
on a specific day or
No,
no?
no, really it just became obvious, that
Mhm.
this is who we are. And then we began to always refer to or usually refer to each other as, this is my wife and this is my husband. And that's the way it is. It's a
Wow.
wonderful thing, for me to get older and know that I'm my own authority,
Right.
So I don't, not that I'm against anybody. I'm not against it, priest or rabbi. I'm not against the traditions or anything like that. I don't need it. I don't, or when it comes to me and Janice, my wife, I don't need anybody's authority, authoritative stamp or anything. This is the way it is, and I accept it, and I appreciate it, and I thank God for it.
Lovely. Wow. Well, congratulations. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
So, in before we disconnect, is there anything you'd want to say to those that are listening and watching that are thinking about their path in life and what they're going to do? Because how, like, if somebody was thinking, "Wow, this seems like an interesting journey to go on. Maybe I should try it." What would you say to them?
Well, this has been my journey.
Hmm.
You have you, and I'm not speaking to you only, Brian. I'm speaking to anybody watching this. You have your own journey, and you're like that little lost kid, the third kid in every story that nobody thought could make it,
Hmm.
but he has to. She has to make it, and I'm just going to say he has to be willing to go to the end of the world.
Hmm.
And if you can go, and it doesn't mean going to the end of the world and standing on a mountain, holding your hammer. It means crawling sometimes, crawling to the end of the world. And if you can do that, if you can really give yourself to crawl to the end of the world for your own healing and reunification, I think it's inevitable. I don't just think it's inevitable. My own little vantage point here on the planet says that you will be successful.
Hmm. Well, thank you. So how can listeners and those watching find you and your work?
Well, I have a website, www.izzitooinsky.com, Izzitooinsky. And I've got my books. You can buy my books there, or and um, you can write to me. And it looks like we're beginning to open up. So I do. Before it closed down, I was doing a lot of casinos, uh, and having a lot of fun doing that. So I do everything from kid shows to casinos, and preschools to prisons, everything.
Hmm.
And yeah, so if you have a performing gig, a fair, festival, or anything, give me a call and maybe we can work it out.
And they can contact you through your website.
Yeah, through my website, and you can email me. That's on the website, but it's Izzi@izzitooinsky.com.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, it's really been an honor and a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for sharing what's alive within you. And is there any projects that you'd like to share with us before we part?
Well, Janice and I are building a great garden.
Okay.
That's
That's
our project. So I'm making long path, beautiful brick path through it, and she's got all kinds of plants and plans, and right now, not knowing what's going to happen, that's my project.
I hear you. I hear you. Well, thank you so much. Really a pleasure. And please give my best to Janice and love as well. And stay healthy and safe.
Okay, Brian, thanks so much.
Thank you. Now we're going to have an awkward ending. So it always goes this way. So 1 second. Oops. Oh, I don't think it worked. Are you still there?
I'm here.
That's so odd.
Are you
My
still here?
1 second. My it, okay. I haven't had this happen before.
Uh-oh. Do we need to do the interview again?
No, it's just it's for whatever reason it's still recording. I'm pretty sure. It's just for whatever reason it's not allowing me to stop it.
Okay, maybe we just need to hang up?
Yeah, I think we can just, what I can do is just close it out. I think this will still work. So anyway, you take care and we'll talk soon.
Okay, Brian.
All right.
Nice
Take care.
talking to you. Bye bye.
Pleasure.